Hi, and welcome to this tutorial on how to create a particle stream using Plexus. Well, it's not exactly a particle stream. It's going to appear as if it's a particle stream. Basically, this tutorial is inspired by Steve Kirby's excellent work he did for Ericsson MWC, and they're featured here in the Plexus page. Specifically, I'm talking about this stuff here at the beginning of this piece. So basically what it looks like is it looks like there's these lights that are generating these particle streams of Plexus systems, right? And the way Steve did this is he used OBJ sequences. So he built some objects in Cinema 4D that were actually animating out, and then he exported that out as an OBJ sequence. And we're going to make another tutorial that shows how to do that method. But until we get that tutorial ready, I wanted to get out this tutorial, which is going to show a bit of a hack, if you will. It's going to show a bit of a faster way of actually achieving something that looks very similar to this. There's a few limitations that I will cover, but for the most part you'll be able to get this look without having to do an OBJ sequence. So again, let's just take one final look. And by the way, I just want to say a quick thanks to Steve for letting us have this on the site, because sharing awesome work with Plexus I think really helps other users see the potential of what you can do with this great plugin. So again, word up to Steve, and thanks for allowing us to also do this tutorial. So let's get right into it. So we're going to start in Cinema 4D, and we're going to create. If I'm going to go to my foreview here. In my top view, I'm just going to scribble. I'm just going to grab the freehand tool here, and I'm just going to scribble what would potentially be my particle path. Just going to go and make a little path like that. And if we go here and we look in the camera view, we're just going to move the camera around so that, you know, it feels like it's a particle stream of some sort. So now that we have that positioned, let's go ahead and create something that's a bit of an object that goes along this spline path. And we're going to do that with the sweep nerves. So first we're going to go and grab a sweep nerves. There it is. And sweep nerves needs a spline, and then it needs an object to sweep along that spline. So we're going to take a circle, and the circle is a little bit big by default. Let's just make it smaller, like 10 here. And so just put the circle and then the spline underneath, and there we have our little sweep object. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit just so that I get a little bit more fill on my camera. The other thing I want to do right away, by the way, is I want to go ahead and set my scene to be the same size that I'm going to output. So I'm going to make this 1280 by 720, and I'm going to make it 24 frames per second. Don't forget that when you change the frame rate here, you also want to change your project settings to 24. Okay, so now we have our camera's a little bit wider, so we can actually go and take advantage of this new aspect ratio. Alright, that's pretty good. Now, there's two steps to this. First is we're going to need to output an OBJ. So if you go ahead and click on this, you can see that the detail of the points is extremely dense here. That's because by default there's both the spline and the circle use what Cinema 4D calls adaptive intermediate points, which means that it's a lot of points. So we're going to go ahead and relax both the spline and the circle. And the way you do that, or we're going to do that, is we're going to switch the spline from adaptive to natural. And now I have a sort of control over how many. I'm going to go into the top view where here it's really obvious what's going on. I'm going to go zoom out so you can see. But if I scrub through this thing, you can see here that if I go down, it gets all jaggedy. If you look here, you can see how it gets all jaggedy because there's no points really. And as I start adding points, it's almost like it starts getting a little bit smoother and smoother. So we're going to go ahead and bring this up to about 20 points. And we're going to do the same for the circle. We're going to bring the circle to natural. And we're just going to break that down. We probably only need like a couple of points for the circle because you'll see, because once we make it into a plexus, it really doesn't need a lot of detail. And then the last thing we want to do is we want to go into the sweep NURBS itself, and here are the isoparam subdivisions. We want to go ahead and you can actually bring those up and down as well. So if you can see here how when I scrub through this, if you look at the top view, you can really see them sort of changing. And we'll set that to about 20 as well. So you can see here now that we have sort of a nice even division of these sort of ribs, if you will. And that's because the reason we're doing this is because Plexus draws points between all the points that it finds in the OBJ. So we want our points in our OBJ to sort of be uniformly distributed so that when we make the Plexus, it looks similar like this. If you leave it in the adaptive mode, because it's a spline in Cinema, it still looks like a tube, but once we make it into an OBJ, it looks really disjointed and doesn't really look very good. So, alright, so now we've created our object that it's going to become the Plexus, if you will. And then the next thing we need to do is sort of animate something along this, along this path, or along this spline, so that it appears as if it's the particle emitter that's emitting the Plexus. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to create a null, just take a null object. And to the null object, we're going to add a tag called align to spline. And then in the tag properties here, the spline path, we just drag the spline from the sweep NURBS into here. And then if we click back on the tag properties for animate spline, you can see there's a position thing that if we scrub, you can see that it moves the spline along the path. So let's go ahead and make our animation 4 seconds long, which is 96 frames at 24 frames per second. Sorry, down here. So now we have 4-second animation, and at the beginning at 0, we're going to go ahead and animate the null. Here we'll set the keyframe for position at 0, and then we'll go to the very end, and we'll go and make this 100 and set a keyframe. So if we select the null and we scrub along our timeline, we can see now that it nicely animates along the spline. So to export the OBJ is very easy. I always, by the way, when I make these things, I like to keep a copy of the editable version, which is this sweep NURBS. So I'm just going to copy it and turn off the main one, and then I'm going to select the new one, and you go under Objects and you say Make Editable, or the shortcut is the letter C. And as you can see here, it just made it into a polygon object that we can then export. So we're going to go ahead, so File, Export. And OBJ is the wavefront model type. So if you don't know why it doesn't say Export OBJ, it's because you want to select Export Wavefront, which is an OBJ file. So as you can see here, I've already exported it once, but I'm going to do it again. Just call it tube.obj. Hit save. I'm just going to go ahead and replace that. And that now gives us our OBJ, and then the next thing we want to do is export our scene into After Effects. So before we do that, we need a camera, so we're going to go ahead and add a camera. And if you hit this little button here, it makes your camera active, and you can see it just matched what I was doing here. And once I do that, let's go ahead and save this scene. We'll call this scene tube.c4d. Replace, that's good. And to export it, you go into the render settings, and you again set your output to be the same that you want it to be in After Effects. And then under Save, you got to set the path. So we'll just set the path here, even though we're not going to save anything. And then here under Compositing Project File, you want to go ahead and click on Save, include 3D data, and then hit Save Project File. And again, it's tube.eec, which I already done, but I'll go ahead and replace that. So now I've saved this scene so that I can import it in After Effects. So if I go into After Effects, I'm going to go ahead and double click to import, and I'm going to go ahead and import the tube.aec. If you're not able to import this file type, it's because you need to install the Cinema 4D After Effects import plugin, which you can get from the Maxon site. Alright, so now I've got this scene here, and if I open this up, you can see that the TIFF is unrendered, but that's because we haven't rendered it, so that's okay. As you can see, there's no null. Why is there no null? Because I forgot something. I forgot to do two things. One is I have to, the same way I converted this editable sweep nerves into a polygon, it's almost like I baked the model. I need to do the same thing with this animation, because the animation here only has 2 keyframes, and the way that it knows to go all wiggly is because of the spline, but that will not translate when it comes into After Effects. So what I have to do is bake this animation, and the way you do that is you select the null object, and you go ahead and right click and you say show tracks, which opens up the timeline and also imports that null object into the timeline. And then it also imports whatever was actually animated, in this case the align to spline position. But what we want to do is select the null object. The parent object is what we want to select, not the align to spline tag. So if you select the null object and you go under functions, you can choose bake objects. And really all we want to bake is the position, so you can just leave all the default settings, and then you hit OK. It's going to create a new object, a new null object. So if I click on this here, you can see here all these keyframes were created. So if I now view the show tracks for that, you can see here that it's created all these keyframes. And if I hide the original guy and I select this one, I can then scrub and see that this null also moves along the spline, which is what we want. And then the last thing we want to do is to this new baked null object, we want to apply another tag called external compositing, and this is what's going to allow us to bring this animation and these keyframes into After Effects. So we'll go ahead and do the render settings again, hit save project file, and save the tube.aec again, hit yes. If we come back into After Effects, we can go ahead and delete this old one and bring in a new one. And if we open this now, we should have the null object, which we do. And if we scrub here, oops, aha, no keyframes. Let's see why. I think I know why. I think it's because I forgot to say I wanted all my frames. Yes. So it essentially exported just frame 0. That's why we had just the one keyframe at 0. So if I go ahead and change this to all frames, and again I go to save project file. Now let's try this once more. Delete this one and bring this in. So now if we open this up and we look, now we can see that there's all the keyframes, and you can see the null animating along the same path that it was doing in Cinema 4D. So we can go ahead and delete this color bars because we don't need this, and we'll call this null object, I don't know, spline path. And we'll go ahead and turn down the opacity of that to 0 because we don't need to see that. So what we'll do is create a new solid, and we'll call this one Plexus, and the solid should also be comp size. And to this we will apply Robite Plexus. And this is, by the way, the new 1.2 version of Plexus. So we'll go ahead and, I guess it can be at the top, doesn't really matter. So the first thing we'll do is we'll add an OBJ object. So under Add Object, we select OBJ, and it sticks it here in the middle. Then we go ahead and click Import OBJ, and we select the OBJ that we exported earlier. And once it's loaded in, we don't need to be at full resolution here, we can go to half. You can see here it's off to the side. That's for two reasons. So if we click down and transform OBJ, the first thing we need to do is set the XY location to 0. So instead of 640 by 360, we want to go 0 and 0. And then we also want to rotate the X 180 degrees. I'm not sure why that is. I'm assuming it's because the world coordinates from Cinema are different than they are in After Effects. But once we do that, you'll see if I select the spline path that it's now perfectly aligned with what we exported, or what we got from Cinema. So once we have this, now we have our OBJ thing. If you look at the OBJ resolution slider, we're going to go ahead and twirl this down. As I bring down the resolution, let's see. So there, and this is the main reason, by the way, that we brought down the resolution within Cinema, because we don't really need the same resolution you need to do a nice, perfectly smooth rendered object. Let's go ahead and set this to 10, that you do for 3D. So check out how cool these little patterns that it actually creates. Let's start at 1 so you can actually see. So this is just really the bare bones there. And then as I go up, it starts creating some really cool little patterns. And I think all of these by themselves are really cool. This one almost looks like a ribbon there. It's pretty sweet. And you can, when you do this technique, you can apply this to any one of these resolutions that you want. Alright, so if you noticed, the clock just changed. That's because my battery died, even though it said that it was connected, but something was fishy. Anyway, so pardon the slight interruption here in the tutorial. But what I was saying is that you want to choose an OBJ resolution that works for you. Now, depending on how you set those spline settings in Cinema 4D is what resolution will work for you. So in this case, 6% work for me, but if you made a very simple object, you might need to be much higher, 80, 90% or something. So, so again, just play with that resolution to see what works for you. Just so you can see, if I go to 100% here, it's going to get super detailed, right? But for what we want, something lower works much better. Okay, so once you have that, you can start playing with other settings within Plexus. In this case, to approximate the look from Steve's animation here, where it's got a little bit of a warbly, you can see that the Plexus is moving as it's being emitted. You can achieve that by adding a noise effector. So we'll go just to add effector and just choose noise, and it sticks a noise effector in here. And if you just turn up the amplitude, you'll start seeing how it immediately starts looking like that. Now, if I scrub through the timeline, you're going to see that it doesn't animate. So if we want that noise to animate, which again in the case of Steve's piece, and if you want it to feel like a particle being generated, then adding a little bit of movement will be great. And you do that if you twirl down noise details. You can go here to noise evolution, and if you move this around, you can see how it moves just by actually having it move. So a clever trick of making that animate over time without having to set keyframes is to simply put an expression on it, and I just held down the option key, by the way, and clicked on the time watch there to set an expression, and the expression is just going to be time. So if we scrub through here, you can see that sort of like at 1 second it sets it to 1 degree, and at 2 seconds it sets it to 2 degrees, and so on. So if we preview that, we can see that you can see that it just you know, animates it slowly. Let's go ahead and preview 2 seconds here and take a look at it. So there you go. That feels like a good flow, but if I wanted it to go faster, I would just say time times 2, for example, and that would be twice as fast. And then if I wanted to go half as fast, then I would do time divided by 2, right? And then you can use that sort of logic to animate it however you want. Okay, but I think time alone just feels pretty good, so we'll leave it at that. And again, now if I preview this, we can just see the Plexus animating at a nice cool rate. So what we need to do now is make it feel like it's a particle emanating, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to do this little cheat that I mentioned at the beginning of the tutorial, which is to use particular, or I'm going to use particular, but you could use any particle stream. You could probably even use the write-on effect or something like that as well. But again, I think that if you're doing something like this, you probably already own particular, and I think particular is the best tool for this. particular effect. So the way I'm going to do that now is I'm going to create another solid. I'm going to call this one particular, and I'm going to go ahead and apply it, trap code particular. And the other thing is I need to get a light. Well, I could attach particular to this null, but it's a lot easier to attach it to a light. So I'm just going to create a new light. And particular likes the lights that attach to be called emitter. Geez, I can't remember if it's 1 or 2 T's. Let's see. 1 M and 2 T's, correct. So once I have a light called emitter, I want to go ahead and attach it to this spline path. And when you attach it, then you want to reveal down position and zero it out so that it's basically glued right to that null. So if we scrub through in time here, we can see the light here is attached to the exact place where the null is. Then in particular, under emitter, we're going to make the emitter type be light. And there you go. You can see it's already attached right away. Then we also want to turn off all the velocity to 0. So it's just drawing a straight line. And if we make the emitter size also 0, it's just going to make a line. So now you can see here that it's just drawing a line along the path as we go along in time. So let's see here. For some reason my spline path was not finished here, so let's just go ahead and pull this away. Alright, so yeah, there you can see it's basically just drawing a line as this null travels through it. So I'm going to go into particular again, and I'm going to just make the particle size a little bit bigger. So right now it's set to 5. If I just scrub this, you can see how it just makes this big fat white line as it goes along. And you probably know where I'm going with this. All I have to do now is make this particular a track mat for the Plexus. So if I go to the Plexus layer and choose track mat, and then I can just choose alpha mat, you're going to see now if I go ahead and preview this, that essentially the particular trail is revealing the Plexus. So we're already starting to get the feel of the Steve piece, but what really sells the Steve piece is that there's this bright light at the tip. So here we go. So it takes a little bit for it to get going for some reason. So we'll actually just preview from here. So there you go. You can see there it's revealing it. But again, if Steve's piece has these little really cool bright lights, which can be simulated just with a lens flare. So we're going to use another fantastic plugin called Optical Flares that you might have heard of from Video Copilot, and we'll call this Optical Flare. And the other cool thing about optical flare versus, say, no lens flares or any of the other lens flares is that it also automatically attaches to a light. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this sucker. And here in positioning mode, I'm just going to choose source track lights, and it automatically attached to my light. And instead of rendering on black, I'm going to go ahead and render on transparent. And if I go forward, you can see here it's quite a stellar lens flare. So let's just tone it back a little bit, bringing down the scale. And we could probably choose another lens flare type. If we just go here in the preset browser, just choose this one here is probably better. So let's choose OK. Again, you can customize the look of the flare however you want. But just looking at it like this, we'll go ahead and preview this, and you're going to see automatically that we got something really close to what the example piece does without having to resort to OBJ sequences. Now, the limitations of this, of course, are that if you're in this particular camera angle, it works really well because the reveal mat does not get in the way of any future pieces. But if the camera was positioned down in a more dramatic angle, which I'm actually going to show you right now. The reveal mat might reveal parts of the Plexus in the future, but my guess is that most of this will be going pretty fast, and hence it will not be that much of an issue depending on how you choreograph your camera. So if you know that this is a limitation, you could just sort of orchestrate your camera in a certain way. So in the case of Steve's piece here, I think you could totally do this for most of these without a problem. Now he looks like he's using a pretty wide camera lens, so let's go ahead and go back to Cinema, and first we're gonna choose a wider lens for our camera. So we'll go ahead and zoom in here. So now, and the reason I'm doing this is just so that there's this, one of the other things is it feels like the Plexus is thicker. I mean, in his case it probably is because it's an OBJ sequence, but for us to simulate how it gets thicker as it gets towards the back, we're just going to do it by having a wide camera lens so that the stuff closer to the camera is fatter and the stuff further away is a little thinner. And so we're going to just start by having our camera here, and we'll go ahead and set a keyframe for both position and rotation. And then we'll go to the end of our animation, and we'll go ahead and rotate the camera around a little bit and zoom in so that we can basically, like he actually cuts through it like this, so we'll do something similar where we'll just go around to the bottom or something. So we're going to cut through it. So this might show the limitations that I'm talking about. So let me set a keyframe here and let's preview this. So this looks pretty good. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually have it start out so we actually see the beginning of the Plexus here. So that, we can see if we hold down if we select the null object, we can actually preview to see if we're going to see it or not. And play that. Oh, what? There it is. See, you see, I don't see it for like the whole beginning of this animation. So first of all, let's go into the F curves for the camera. Now here we're getting a little bit inside baseball. I think this is just sweetening the animation, but I always like to see it through to the cool final product. Oh, we need to see the object on there. So there, takes a little bit to get started, so we're gonna start it even further back here just so that we can preview it. And so let's preview this. So now we'll see the darn it. Let's see, what can we do? Let's bring these out even more. What I'm doing here by pulling these out is I'm making the camera start even slower. So we basically hang out. Oops. I keep forgetting to select the null object. So now we see it. There we go. Alright, so that's pretty cool. So now we have this, and again, just repeat the steps. We just need to go to a save, compositing file. We'll just save over the old one, replace, bring it into After Effects. And now I'm going to show you a cool little trick here. All we need to do is, in the new one, which is this one, all we need to do is copy the camera because the null stays the same. So once I copy that, I can put it in and it'll paste. The way After Effects works is it reads the top camera. Why isn't this? There it is. So I can just delete the thing I imported because we copied the camera already, so that works. This also allows us to show you the new depth of field feature in Plexus 1.2, which is pretty cool. Alright, so now everything else, because particular also works in 3D, pretty much everything stays the same. So let's go ahead and turn off the old camera and preview this. Let's see here. Let's just preview it, see how it just looks in the default. Both particular and optical flare work with 3D cameras, so whenever I make these camera changes, they automatically update. And this is what I was kind of implying about the process of tweaking the animation is a little bit faster and more fluid with this method. Now, Keep in mind, Steve did this. His animation with version 1.0, which did not have depth of field, and it didn't scale the Plexus when it was close to camera. So here I'm actually having some perspective scaling, which I can turn off by going into the Plexus settings, and in rendering here, let's see, I can let's see point size, perspective aware. So if I turn dot off, the points are not perspective aware, and it will also turn off the, actually I think this was in version 1.0. I apologize, but here we can just control it this way. So I'm just gonna make the lines a little bit thicker, and so as well the points a little bit thicker. Alright, so now we can preview this. I believe here we'll just preview it from 1 second on. So here you can see, oh, my points got really big. Let's see, point size. Let's see, 3, 4, 5. That looks, yeah, that looks pretty good. Anyway, so you guys get the idea, I think. You know, you can, and the key here is you have to animate your camera in Cinema 4D, which is not a big problem because it's so easy to import the camera into After Effects. Oh, there you go. Here, this showed a little bit of the problem. As it's going around here, we briefly see, right here, you briefly see a little bit of the future of this curve. So, you know, that would be a problem for this particular thing. You could do things like animate the particular line with thickness and stuff so that it tries to get around it, or just don't have this camera move, or just make it go really fast. You probably wouldn't even notice if I hadn't pointed it out, but let's just take a look at it real quick. So there we go. So this is it. This is the tutorial on how to create a pseudo particle stream using Plexus, particular, and in this case optical flares. So I hope you guys enjoy it, and like I said, look forward to another tutorial where we're going to actually use OBJ sequences, which are super cool, and they generate a true result without having to have any compromises. And it's a little bit more of a workflow explanation, but once you master it, it's super easy. So look forward to that, and I hope you guys enjoy this tutorial.